Everybody's in the system now doesn't access it. Mr. Chair, the government is doing nothing about relieving the burden of home heating oil, relieving the burden of user fees in this province, which they themselves have placed on the backs of Nova Scotians, or I should say, taken out of the wallets of Nova Scotians. And Mr. Chair, the government has done nothing in addressing the insurance issue in this province, except a weak, half-hearted attempt to get them through the election again. That in itself, people aren't buying. They know the difference, Mr. Chair. So Nova Scotians are left wondering, what's up with this government? Well, what's up with this government? Some of them are coming to me and saying, you know, the government's increasing our debt to give us half it back and to use the rest of it for their own political purposes. Then they're going to give us a tax cut, which they should have given us in 2000 when they wouldn't allow the federal tax cut to flow through. So they're giving us back money that was rightfully belonged to us in any case. The government is increasing the debt of this province, the long-term debt, when the Premier said he wouldn't increase it, that it wasn't beneficial, that he wasn't going to mortgage the future of the children of this province and the grandchildren by increasing the debt. Well, guess what? They've done that each and every year since they've taken office. Each and every year since they've taken office. So where does that leave the good people of Nova Scotia? Leaves them wondering what this government is all about. It leaves you wondering what this Premier is all about, the good country doctor from Pictou County, who has flip-flopped so many times in the past 4 years, he must have caught his neck coming around again, you know, by switching positions on many, many issues. Complete turnaround in some issues in this province. You know, and it's a different story every day. We heard, even as recently as last week, that the Premier couldn't recall whether or not they did any polling on Sunday shopping. That was the first time he was asked. Then he said, oh yes, there was a poll, but I'm not sure what it said. Then he said, in some parts of Nova Scotia, people favored it. Other parts didn't. Well, which parts were they, Mr. Premier? Well, we're not sure. We don't know if we have that in writing or not. I was told that. The chairman of the Treasury Board said the same thing. You know, the Minister of Transportation, he couldn't recall who did the poll, who paid for it, whether it was written down and where it was. The phantom poll, couldn't recall where it was. Asked them to table it, to tell us, give Nova Scotians the right information. You're not going to get that, Mr. Chair, because that's information that's going to guide, that's another piece of the puzzle that's going to guide them down the road to when it's advisable for them to finally pull the plug and face the electorate in this province. Well, Mr. Chair, they're going to have to do that soon because they're entering their 5th year in office in another couple of months. And they better not consider playing around with the electorate going into a 5th year in the first mandate of this government, because Nova Scotians will not put up with that this government trying to get another year out of its first mandate because the polls, or the so-called polls, the smoke and mirror polls that we're not able to access, tell them that things aren't right, that they're not fooling anybody on the check, that they're not fooling anybody on the debt, that Nova Scotians are smart enough to know that debt is still growing in this province. Nova Scotians are smart enough to know that down the road they're going to pay dearly for this government's financial indiscretions, that they're going to pay dearly for this government borrowing money to get themselves re-elected this year. They're going to pay dearly for the student debt load in this province and the problems that are going to keep students out of university in the future unless a meaningful program is put on the table that will actually benefit students who are in the system now and those that are going to enter the system. They know, Nova Scotians know, that this government's only objective is to get re-elected. To get re-elected. And then you'll see what this government is all about, if that happens. But, Mr. Chair, we're going to do everything possible to see that that doesn't happen. We're going to try to inform Nova Scotians of the problems that they're facing now and the non-solutions that are being arrived at on that side of the House, on the government side, rather the political agenda that's being employed out there to try to get them re-elected. Nova Scotians, it's our responsibility to let Nova Scotians know as often as we can over the next few weeks and into the election campaign how they're being used by this government for the sole purposes of getting re-elected. For the sole purposes of getting re-elected, Mr. Chair. Now, Mr. Chair, I'm sure that I'm going to have an opportunity again to speak on this particular bill. I'm sure that once we get into clause-by-clause examination of the bill, we'll be able to perhaps put some amendments forth that will improve this bill. I hope that during that particular course of discussion that perhaps the government will see the wisdom of looking at some amendments that will be placed before this House for consideration. So until then, Mr. Chairman, I'll take my place and hopefully at some future date engage in this debate again. Thank you.
Member for Halifax Atlantic.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and appreciate the opportunity to rise for a few moments and speak about this bill, Bill number 36, the Financial Measures Act, at this important stage, which is Committee of the Whole House on Bills. Mr. Chairman, we will first of all debate the principle on the title, debate the principle of the bill, and then as we go along in our proceedings, get to the point where we will be debating clause by clause and have an opportunity to make some amendments, some changes, or at least recommend them, and hopefully the government will accept some of our suggestions, which are serious at this point. There's no question about that our recommendations are very serious. We were concerned and had taken the opportunity during second reading debate to express our concerns with this bill and the very merits of the budget upon which it's based. And I want to talk about that for a few minutes, if I may, Mr. Chairman, at this point in the discussion where we're talking about the principle of the bill and the title. I had the opportunity at second reading on this bill to talk at some length on how confused I thought this whole argument was about a balanced budget, when in fact we may have a document that's presented to this House which has in the bottom line column we have a small surplus, and the government with the support of the media and the support of the government's friends on the outside takes considerable pleasure in being able to present a surplus document, a document which indicates that the difference between the revenues generated and the expenditures of this government has resulted in a surplus. In other words, the government argues they are living within their means. And that's flying in the face of enormous debts being created every single day as a result of the lack of investment in our infrastructure and in programs, Mr. Chairman, that make a significant contribution to the economy and the overall general well-being of the people of Nova Scotia, which in turn generates and is returns itself or is recognized in the overall general growth of our province. And I referred, of course, and I refer again, Mr. Chairman, to things like schools. The Auditor General recently released a report which identified a $500 million capital construction deficit in schools in the province of Nova Scotia. In other words, in order to get our 433 schools in the province of Nova Scotia up to some standard, it would require the investment of $500 million, Mr. Speaker. If that's the case, in other words, that's money owing. That's a liability. We're going to have to pay that at some point. That investment is going to have to be made. And, Mr. Chairman, the longer we wait, the longer we defer making those investments, the greater that debt will become. And likewise, in the areas of transportation and highways, transportation infrastructure, bridges, culverts, Mr. Chairman, secondary roads, there is tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in deferred capital spending in these areas, that if we don't begin as a government to make those kinds of investments, we're going to end up paying doubly down the road in terms of the costs as that infrastructure continues to deteriorate. The cost to then bring it up to a standard, but also the cost to our economy of trucks and cars that are damaged, that deteriorate as a result of traveling over these roads, the extra costs of travel time of goods and services traveling on roads that have deteriorated beyond the point where the transportation is effective and efficient. Mr. Chairman, those are all investments. Those are all debts. Those are all liability. That's money owing. That's investments that are going to have to be made by a government at some point down the road. And that all we're doing by playing this game of having a quote-unquote balanced budget, when all of these investments are outstanding, Mr. Chairman, that we're just simply deferring that expense to future generations. It is, frankly, penny wise and pound foolish, and it's a game that we have to recognize is wrong-headed, Mr. Speaker. I mean, I suppose if we could see that the government was making a realistic investment in some of these areas as on a go-along basis, Mr. Chairman, then we wouldn't need to be so concerned. But what we see is a government who is coming up with, failing to come up with a plan, with a strategy about how to deal with those investments, how to deal with the fact that we are borrowing over $1 billion annually to service the debt. The debt continues to grow each and every year, Mr. Chairman, and has this government presented us with any plan on what it plans to do to bring that down? So we've got not only these enormous debts in infrastructure that need to be honored, that need to be made, we also have a debt, an overall fiscal debt in the province of Nova Scotia that is growing by leaps and bounds, is growing by well in excess of $1 billion every year. $1 billion simply in servicing charges, Mr. Speaker, in order to borrow money for the operation of this government. So this government is failing to make investments in those kinds of important investments in capital infrastructure. I would suggest to you that this government is going to show a very small surplus for the year 2003, 2004, because they have failed to commit themselves to the counselors who work for the RSS, Mr. Speaker. These women and men who provide an important service to intellectually disabled, to young men and women who cannot live without the support, who need to have skills and supports provided to them to help them, Mr. Speaker, to help train and develop a level of independence so that people can live independently or in small groups. These people who provide this work, this important, this valuable work, they are not able to realize a fair wage increase in this round of bargaining because this government has decided that they are not worth the investment, that they would rather, in fact, show that they have a small surplus in their bottom line, that's more important to them than it is to make that investment in the women and men that provide those important services through our RSS, Mr. Speaker. So you've got people outside this house and elsewhere who work for our RSS who are going without working, without providing that service to their clients. You have the clients, Mr. Speaker, who are being neglected, who are being ignored, who are being shunted aside in a dispute between the government and these workers. You're having families that are being torn apart because this government has decided that instead of paying these workers a fair wage, instead of being prepared to negotiate freely and fairly with these workers, they have decided that in the balancing of demands within its responsibility, that having a small surplus is more important. But let's look at that a little more, Mr. Chairman, because these are losers. These people who are clients of our RSS are losers in this battle of the government trying to present itself as fiscal managers, sound fiscal managers. The people who provide that service to these clients are being ignored, are losers in this fight, in this balancing act. There are others. The teachers and support staff who work in schools that aren't being maintained, that aren't being repaired, that aren't being renovated, that aren't getting the investments that I talked about earlier, the $500 million. The children that attend these schools, the teachers, support staff. Mr. Speaker, these people are losers in this game that this government is playing. The people that drive over the roads day in and day out, they are the losers in this game that this government is playing. This government announced with great fanfare in this budget it was going to give Nova Scotians $155. Straight out, no holds barred. Here's $155 for you, Nova Scotian. They don't want anything in return now, you understand. They're not asking for anything. The fact that it was intended to come within days of the election, within days of when that Nova Scotian was going to put their X next to a name in the ballot box or in the ballot booth, Mr. Chairman, had nothing to do with the motivation behind this $155. But let's look at this $155 Does it go to all Nova Scotians? No, it doesn't. There are winners, again, there are winners and losers. There are the chosen and the unworthy. Mr. Speaker, there are 300,000 Nova Scotians, 300,000 Nova Scotians who don't earn enough money that they will end up paying $1 in provincial income tax. They are not eligible for this $155. 300,000 Nova Scotians. 438,000 Nova Scotians will be eligible. So they're winning. 438,000 Nova Scotians are eligible. So I guess the Tories are looking more favorably on those people. They're somehow worthy of the $155. But people, Nova Scotians, are out there right now, as we speak, asking themselves, why? I mean, let's face it, $155 is $155. But why do the Tories not think that I am worthy, or that I qualify for, or that I have earned this $155? Do I not live in Nova Scotia? Do I not try my best to make a contribution to my community? Have I not, the senior, the woman who lives on a Canada pension disability, lived in this province all her life and contributed, raised a family, makes $8,000 a year on a Canada pension disability, she's not eligible. She's not eligible. She hasn't made enough contribution. Is that what Tories are saying to this woman? Is this what they're saying to the 300,000 Nova Scotians? Sorry, you don't fit. You don't fit our criteria of the worthy. And therefore, you're not going to benefit from this $155 kickback. Mr. Chairman, look at the list. The clients of our RSS, the workers at our RSS, teachers, support workers, students, truck drivers. I mean, the list goes on and on. The people who are losers in Toryland, people whose insurance costs are going up, people who continue to pay more for their fuel costs, home heating fuel, but they don't seem to fit in this Tory land of the worthy and the unworthy. But there's more. There's more definition being made in this budget as to who's worthy and who isn't worthy. Well, the government announced, provided for in Bill number 36, Mr. Chairman, that in January of 2004, if this Tory government is still around, and let me tell you, increasingly I have my doubts, because, Mr. Chairman, Nova Scotians are offended by the way this government is picking winners and losers. Just like we've always done in this province with economic development. The government picks the winners and the losers. And the government can't pick winners and losers. They're always going to fail, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to that. So Nova Scotians are offended by the fact that 438,000 Nova Scotians are going to get $155. 300,000 are not going to get $155. January of 2004, this government, hanging on by its veritable fingertips as we speak to power, hopes that it will be in a position and saying to Nova Scotians, For those of you that are worthy, here's your $155. And if you re-elect us in January of 2004, we're going to give you a 10% tax cut. We're going to give you a 10% tax cut. How much does that 10% tax cut cost? About $150 million. About $150 million in foregone revenues to the province of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. And guess who's going to benefit?
Who is?
Is it the woman I was talking about today that makes $8,000 a year on a Canada pension disability? No. She didn't get the 155. No. She doesn't get the 10% either. Mr. Speaker. Friends of this government, senior executives of the insurance companies. There are a few that may live here, although I don't know. Senior executives of the banks. David Mann, Nova Scotia Power, Emera, in the $400,000 club. He's going to get a chunk of change back on the 10%, let me tell you. People making $25,000 are going to get a couple of bucks. But it's the people that are making the money in the province of Nova Scotia that are going to receive benefits from the 10% tax cut. So again, you've got low income, no income Nova Scotians who get excluded from this supposed $155 windfall. They're not going to get anything from the 10% tax cut, while high income earners are going to get the $155 and the 10% tax cut. But the other side of that is that the $150 million that this government is foregoing because of the Christmas present that it hopes to give its friends, the 10% tax cut, means that the government will have $150 million less to pay for the programs, to pay its employees, to pay and to fund important services like that provided by RRSS and its employees, Mr. Speaker. And they will end up borrowing more money, and the debt servicing costs continue to rise, and the debt continues to rise. You can see where this is going, Mr. Chairman. That's the concern that so many of us have on this side with this budget and with Bill number 36. The government is trying to make short-term gains, Mr. Chairman, at the expense of hundreds of thousands of Nova Scotians. It is wrong. It's a wrong thing to do, and I and my colleagues, we're going to continue to argue this and to encourage the government to do the right thing and stop just looking, at that area just slightly beyond their nose, which is the next election. Think about what's in the best interest of Nova Scotians. Think about what's in the best interest of the economy of the province of Nova Scotia. So, Mr. Speaker, I've taken a few minutes now to speak on the principle of this bill, and I will take the opportunity again to rise and add a bit more to this debate, and I certainly look forward to hearing the interventions of other members of this committee. Thank you.
The member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I rise to speak on a number of issues with regards to Bill number 36, the Financial Measures Act. Mr. Chairman, I believe it would be safe to say that we've seen some considerable evolving of of not only the political process but the financial process and the priorities of not just this government but of the people of Nova Scotia just in the last 2 months. Mr. Chairman, in the last session of the House, and indeed the early stages of this session of the House, the issue of long-term care for seniors in Nova Scotia was of considerable consternation for many Nova Scotians. It was an issue that evolved over, I would say, a 25 to 30 year period, starting back in the early 1970s when municipalities started to establish some criteria for seniors who would be entering into nursing homes and these public nonprofit institutions and private institutions. And the criteria for the Department of Community Services at that point to the various municipalities varied quite substantially from one unit to the other because some municipalities were extremely well-to-do and some were not so well-to-do. And as that evolved, Mr. Chairman, that eventually under the restructuring of government became the responsibility of the Department of Health. And little did one come to realize that in such a short period of time that the amended regulations that were put in and the criteria that were put in, particularly by this government, would be so detrimental to the financial well-being and the security of many families across this province. Mr. Speaker, we've found that seniors saved all their lives to help their families. They tried to do the best they could, paying their bills, trying to save a little money for a rainy day, and perhaps to help their children and their grandchildren. You know, they would invest perhaps in their home, maybe a little piece of land, maybe a summer cottage if they were fortunate enough to have the means to do that. All these things, you know, every case being somewhat different, somewhat unique, Mr. Chairman, all built to the lifeline and the self-sustainability of the family institution. And then all that seemed to have come into question within the last fiscal year. And we see the effects of that, Mr. Chairman, even in Bill 36. And although the government found a way to kind of push a few buttons to delay the pressures that were before it over the winter months, I don't think they've really resolved some of the critical issues, primarily being that about the health care cost within nursing homes. Mr. Chairman, that, as we all know, and by the government's own admission, would be a $35 million a year charge to the government of Nova Scotia. Now let's put things in perspective, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chairman. The government indicated that it could not afford to go any further than it did. Well, Mr. Chairman, this is the same government that indicated in 1999 it would cost $74.6 million to correct all the problems in health care. And they condemned the Liberal government of the day, the Russell McClellan government's health care investment plan, which was an investment of $600 million to correct many of the long-term systemic problems that we would face had we not laid out the plan that we did. And the government said, or the opposition Tories said at that point, no, that's not good enough. We can do it. We don't need to do that. What you're trying to do is you're trying to bankrupt the province. You don't have a balanced budget with this health care investment fund. We can do it with a balanced budget and with $74.6 million. Well, Mr. Chairman, so far they're after spending $560 million. Now that's with additional revenues from the federal government. That's with increased CHST dollars coming from the federal government. And that's also, Mr. Chairman, with the fact that the provincial government, this provincial government, is putting a larger percentage of these CHST dollars into health than they were prior to the formation of the government. See, most Nova Scotians that I speak to, Mr. Chairman, don't realize that when the federal government gives CHST dollars, that's for Canada Health and Social Transfer dollars, to cover education, community services, health, and all these different social programs, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chairman, they put it in one block. And it's up for the province to decide in which department it wishes to spend that money. Now, conveniently, until the provincial government started whining and complaining about the federal government not putting a substantive into health care, saying that they were only paying about 15% or 17%. But what they forgot to say, Mr. Chairman, by making that statement is that if you were to take all the other dollars that were coming down in transfer payments, it would mean that the federal government was paying close to or in excess of 90% of all the educational costs in the province of Nova Scotia, and also for community services. So the provincial government, the Premier, the Minister of Health, the Minister of Education, the Minister of Community Services, they were playing mind games with the people of Nova Scotia. They were playing mind games with the taxpayers. They were misleading the people of Nova Scotia into believing that it was the federal government's fault that the healthcare system was falling to pieces, despite the fact that they spent $500 million more than they said they were going to spend when they came to government. So you look at Bill 36, Mr. Chairman, and you have to ask yourself, where's their plan? Where's the Tory Blue Book plan that they had to correct all the problems in healthcare, which they, by their own admission, in the Blue Book, said that they were administrative problems? What happened? Things didn't get dramatically different in terms of what the healthcare problems were. They were there. They knew what they were. They were a partner, Mr. Chairman, to the budgetary process in the previous year, in 1998. They had as great access to the budgetary process as the minority government did. Unless they're now admitting that they were voting for something and didn't know what they were voting for. They didn't do their homework. At least the NDP said even before they saw the document they were going to vote against it. I mean, that doesn't, give very good comfort when you have public policymakers saying even before they read the document they're going to vote against it. So that'll tell you what their objective was. You respect them for that. I mean, it doesn't apply good logic. I see. So now they're trying to take credit for the 1998 budget that the Liberals brought in. See, that's one of the good things about the NDP. They can always be on both sides of the coin and still make themselves believe that they're a winner, which, Mr. Speaker, would explain perhaps why they'll never be in power. And the people of Nova Scotia are fairly reasoned individuals. Now, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chairman, a few more observations I'm sure will rouse them out of their burrows from underground, and they will come to life, and maybe they will participate fully in this debate, as we are hoping, Mr. Chairman, that members of the government benches will stand up and explain why they find it so acceptable that the seniors in their constituencies are gouged continuously by this government. The policies of this government, Mr. Chairman, are very regressive. They are harsh. and they're very difficult for seniors of this province. Now, that's just one issue, Mr. Chairman. That's just a health issue. So what happened to the Tory Blue Book plan of correcting all the problems in health care for $74.6 million? Well, somebody has amnesia, or they're not very good mathematicians. Now, take your choice. Or maybe they just can't count, their own budget figures. And it's not the first budget, Mr. Chairman, that we would have seen errors in the Minister of Finance's budget. We pointed that out on a previous day, as did others in the House pointed out considerable errors in their calculations. Now let's look at the issue of, let's say, insurance, Mr. Chairman. We see what the insurance companies are doing to Nova Scotians. Now, I don't mean the insurance brokerage companies, Mr. Chairman. I made this point the other day. Whether it be, let's say, Kerr Insurance in Glace Bay, or Amherst Insurance in Amherst in Cumberland County, or Fraser and Hoyt, or what have you. Anywheres in the province, Mr. Speaker. They're only brokers. They're contractors for the big insurance companies, the multinationals. And they, in many cases, are required to advise their clients what the fee is going to be for coverage, whether it be their automobile, whether it be their home, whether it be their business, whether it be a recreational vehicle, whether it be life insurance, whether it be term insurance, what have you, Mr. Chairman. The question one has to ask is, what is the provincial government doing? Or perhaps better put, what is the provincial government not doing that it should be doing? Well, first of all, Mr. Chairman, we once had a department known as Community Consumer Affairs, the Department of Consumer Affairs, that was set up back approximately 30 years ago. And it wasn't until a Tory administration came along, then they amended the Act requiring that all consumers of insurance products in the province of Nova Scotia pay a hidden tax. They were required to bury the cost of the tax that government was collected in the insurance premiums. Mr. Chairman, 20 years later, they increased that tax, still requiring it to be a hidden tax. So now, for every dollar that consumers have to pay on insurance rates and premiums, it will mean that the government will collect a hidden tax, 3%. Now, last year they collected approximately $35 million. This year they will collect, by their own estimates, $48.5 million. So they will make an additional $13.5 million. Now, Mr. Chairman, this is before these substantial rate increases were announced. So if what they were collecting, let's say pre-2003, was $35 million, and the insurance rates double, then we know simple economics, simple math tells you they're not going to collect $13.5 million more than they did last year. They're going to collect double what they collected last year. They're not going to collect $35 million plus 13.5. They're going to collect $35 million plus close to, near, or more than another 35. They will collect close to $70 million this year if the insurance companies double their rates. How can it not be? Because they're collecting 3% on whatever fee is charged. Mr. Chairman, I spoke with representatives from several volunteer fire departments in my constituency just over the weekend. We saw the ATV news article that indicated concern from a number of these volunteer fire departments, one being the Bateston Volunteer Fire Department, and the other one being the Donkin Volunteer Fire Department. Both these volunteer fire departments, having spoken with the volunteer fire representatives from those departments, indicated to me that they will be seeing a doubling of their rates, despite the fact that they have had no claims whatsoever. For example, the Bateston Volunteer Fire Department, the rates last year and 2 years ago were approximately $1,780. This year, Mr. Chairman, they will be close to $3,800. Now that, for a volunteer fire department, is a substantial increase. And if they don't have the additional dollars to pay that premium come June 1st, they're out of luck. They cannot put these fire trucks on the road. And given the fact that volunteer fire departments are going out saving pieces of real estate and homes and lives that will net a saving to large insurance companies, these large multinationals, there has to be some consideration. There has to be some consideration for the service that they are providing. You don't punish the people that help you. You say thank you. I mean, that's the way we were brought up. If somebody does a good deed, you at least stop and say thank you. You don't stick them with a bill twice as much as they had the year before, which is what's happening with the large insurance companies. Now, in the Donkin Volunteer Fire Department, their insurance premium for their vehicles for this year will go from approximately $2,000 to $4,000, a little better than $4,000. It's actually more than a 100% increase. They cannot sustain that type of an impact, Mr. Chairman. And given the fact that the average age of these vehicles is about 15 years, I fret to think what the bill would be if it was a new vehicle, if it was a new pumper or tanker, you know, tank for carrying the water. So the question again comes back to, why isn't the provincial government doing something? Because, Mr. Speaker, Bill 36 speaks to the government agenda, and that is they will not be collecting an extra 10 or $15 million. They will not be collecting an extra 10 to 20% in tax. They will be collecting close to a 100% increase in tax, which means that the Minister of Finance, knowing what's happening over at the URAB, what's happening with Nova Scotians, because just about every opposition MLA in this legislature has brought numerous examples from across Nova Scotia of where the rates have doubled. So the Minister of Finance knows full well that he has underestimated his revenues. Mr. Speaker, concern was raised last year about the Minister of Finance underestimating his revenues. Why, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chairman? Well, because they want to downplay the fact that they are gouging consumers. They are gouging the people of Nova Scotia. That's what they're doing. And at the same time, the more that they can buffer themselves away from the reality of the situation, they'll say, oh no, that's a problem out in the marketplace. That's a problem that's over with the URAB. That's where, you know, our consumer advocate is going to speak on this, and he's going to go around the provinces, and he's going to research, and he's going to bring back some suggestions, and he's going to do all these things. Well, if you listen to CBC this morning, Mr. Chairman, you will get a slightly different perspective on what the mandate of the consumer advocate is all about and what he's proposing for government. And by the way, Mr. Chairman, he would not have been on CBC if he was not given the authorization by the minister and cabinet, because it's right in his contract. He's not allowed to speak to the public unless he gets the government's authorization. So, I mean, you can't help but be suspect as to what the modus operandi is. Mr. Chairman, the government is trying to buy some time with the legislation it has. All the way, and all the time, it's going to the bank with bags of money that it's collecting from the seniors of this province, from the students of this province who are struggling every summer to try and make enough money to make ends meet, to make a few dollars, to be able to put towards their tuition, whether it be at university, whether it be at a technical institute, whether it's even, yes, Mr. Chairman, going back to high school to pay for some necessities, whether it be personal clothing, whether it be for their meals at school, whether it be for transportation, Mr. Speaker, because if they want to be partaking in some of these extracurricular activities, they have no choice. Especially if you live out in a rural setting. Let's say out in Haines County, you have to have a vehicle. If you're living 5 or 10 miles, or in some cases, like in the constituency I represent, you have to travel 25 miles, which is about 40 kilometers, one way every day. And if you want to partake in extracurricular activities to be competitive and to be involved, for example, in the French immersion program or the advanced math and science programs, Mr. Chairman, you can't follow the bus schedule. You have to have other modes of transportation. So, on the other hand, Mr. Chairman, let's look at, for example, our university students. And this is perhaps one of the most unique problems I've faced as an MLA for university students since I've come to Halifax to represent their interests in Cape Breton West. This year, I've had more students come to my office in January of this year because they have been put in the position, after having received a student loan, which, by the way, they were told would only be enough for the first half of the year, the school year. So let's say if the tuition is, for the sake of discussion, $6,000. They would get a $3,000 loan, and in hopes that they would somehow, between their parents or their guardians or themselves, they would raise that other $3,000 when the second semester would come. I've had more students come to my office this year saying that they were advised that they were going to be taken off the registration roll at the local university because they can't afford to pay the second half of their tuition. So here's what's happening, Mr. Chairman. We have a lot of students, many students in this province, who are now eligible for enough money to get through the first half of the year, but the second half, they can't afford it. So they can't stay in university, they can't complete their course, they can't get their degree, and yet they're faced with this bill. Now, where is the fairness? You know, where is this so-called Millennium Scholarship that's supposed to help students? Where is this student aid process that's supposed to help students who can't financially help themselves? The criteria, Mr. Speaker, is just getting absolutely mind-boggling what officials within the Department of Education are demanding of students these days. You know, it's almost to the point where parents and guardians, and in some cases where students don't even live at home, but because they're not of a certain age, over the age of 24, they have to now, I recall one student coming into my office and being advised that their parents had to go and get a court-sworn affidavit saying that they would not provide money for that student. Now, I find that absolutely mind-boggling, to think that officials within the Department of Education would demand that of a student. I mean, what's it coming to? Is this some kind of a police state? You know, you give a student loan for the first half of the year, and they say, well, look, my parents can't afford it. You know, the insurance rates on their vehicle has doubled. The insurance rates on their home have doubled. You know, the price of gasoline has increased by about 50% since this government came to power. And the cost goes on and on and on. Mr. Chairman? Well, the member for Colchester North said it's not true. Well, I would invite the honourable member to stand in his place and explain why it's okay for the students and the seniors of this province to pay twice as much this year in insurance premiums as they were last year. I would ask him why it's acceptable for the Nova Scotia government to gouge through a hidden tax twice as much from the consumers of this province as they were last year. I can't accept that. And I know that honourable member is a good individual, and he really doesn't in his heart believe that, Mr. Chairman. He doesn't believe that gouging students and seniors is the right thing to do.
Order, please. It seems as if the honourable member for Colchester North is going to take the honourable member for Cape Breton West up on his invitation. The member for Cape Breton North.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Colchester North.
Mr. Chairman, it was my thoughts that I thought that I understood the member to say the price of gasoline increased 50%. 50% since we took office. Now, is that what the honourable member said? And if he did, would he correct himself, please?
I hear the honourable member for Cape Breton West saying 40%. The honourable member for Cape Breton West has the floor.
Yes.
After that intervention, the honourable member still has the floor.
If he will look at the peak of the price increases, it was a 40% increase. It's gone down some, but it was 40% at the peak, and all the member has to do is just look at the prices that are listed in front of the gas stations. Mr. Chairman? Well, Mr. Chairman, 69 cents he's saying. But when this government came to power, it was closer to 61 and 62 cents. And at the peak, it was up to 90 cents and 92 cents in some service stations. That's a 50% increase, but I gave the benefit of the doubt. I gave the benefit of the doubt to the honourable member for Colchester North. But that hadn't been said by the Minister of Finance's own admission. He indicated they will collect an extra $13 million. No, I do apologize. It was the Deputy Minister of Finance who came before Public Accounts, indicated that they would collect $13 million more this year than they did last year because of the price increase. So is the member for Colchester North saying that he is now willing to give that back to the consumers? Is he willing to say that he will give that back to the seniors and to the university students of this province to help them be able to pay for their debt load? Is he saying, Mr. Chairman, that he agrees that the consumers have been gouged? Or will he be like the rest of his colleagues, sit in silence? That's the question I would ask. Because if you take, and I believe, based on the notices that have been given by insurance companies and all the assumptions that have been made and the evidence and the examples that have been presented to this committee and to the House, it's safer to say that the government won't just collect $13.5 million over the $35 million last year. They will collect perhaps at least $25, maybe $30 million. I think it's safe to say they will collect $35 million, which is what they expected, plus if the rates double, that means they'll collect $70 million. But let's give it a bit of a breakdown because it's a phase in. So they're going to collect close to $65 million. So you got $30 million that they didn't expect that they would collect. You got an extra $13 million in fuel tax. There's $43 million more that they've gouged out of the pockets of consumers. And we haven't even got on to some other issues yet, Mr. Chairman. And they're going to say, mea culpa, we're going to give you back $65 million, and you should thank us. Now, you'd have to be pretty naive to think that people of Nova Scotia are that gullible. People of Nova Scotia are hurting, and they are hurting bad, and they need some leadership. Mr. Chairman, they don't want people trying to waffle around and hope that the issue will go away. It doesn't go away. You know, you give credit where credit is due. You know, the issue was raised by the leader of the NDP. It was. They didn't offer any solution per se, but they did raise the issue. I mean, and everything has to start somewheres. It really does. I mean, everybody knew it. Everybody was working at it. I was working at it at the constituency level of my constituency, and I'm sure every member in this House was. But to think that one can take ownership as being the only ones that can solve all problems. They may be the only ones that can raise problems and flag them before the public. Maybe they aren't. But give credit where credit is due. And the member for Hants East, he knows that I would do that. I'm not above that, or below that, or however way they like to think. The fact of the matter is, Mr. Chairman, we have a problem. We have a real problem here today. The government is going to almost double its tax revenue on insurance premiums in this province, and it says it can't do anything about it. Well, give the extra $30 million back to the consumers. Maybe we could help a few university students stay in university. Maybe we could help a few senior citizens stay in their home, or to be able to continue to drive, you know, for what limited access they have, you know, going to the marketplace, going to get groceries, or going out and spending an afternoon with their friends down at local Club 55 or whatever, you know, seniors groups they collect together with to enjoy, you know, in the retirement days of their lives, or even to be able to go and visit one of their children or grandchildren, you know, go and help their children, babysit for a couple afternoons or whatever. So those people, those good folks, can go and work and be able to pay the bills to help. So it goes around and around. You know, it's a never-ending cycle, Mr. Chairman. And thinking in such a compartmentalized fashion as this government does, in isolation, is why the people are so upset. And they're really confused. Like this, you can take this $155, you can give it to every Nova Scotian 3 times over. It's still not going to solve the inherent problems in the system. You know, and you know, we listened on the news on Friday past, the Minister of Environment and Labour accusing my colleague from Clare, saying that, oh, he was fear-mongering, saying that insurance companies were pulling up stakes and leaving. Oh, Mr. Chairman, he wasn't fear-mongering. I mean, we saw what was happening down in the Minister of Transportation and Communications constituency. How did he solve an insurance problem? Oh, don't worry about it. We'll get you extra money for your festival, and you can channel that extra money into paying your insurance cost. Well, isn't it wonderful to be able to have a Minister of the Crown to be able to access pools of money to selectively help those in his or her constituency? This is not how you deal with public policy problems. Trying to patchwork just to save a seat, you know, to perhaps buy a few votes. I don't know if that's the right term, but it would certainly appear to me that that was the message that was coming across through the media, Mr. Chairman. Oh, we got an extra $40,000 or $50,000 for you. Don't worry about it. All of a sudden, a public issue became a hush-hush from Friday to Monday, and next thing you know, that wooden boat is going down the main street again. But what about all the volunteer fire departments? What about all the other community festivals? What about the boys and girls clubs in this province? What about all these youth groups, Mr. Chairman? Is this what the government's going to do? Is it going to be just like it used to do during the John Buchanan days? That paternalistic, you know, if you'll be good to me, I'll make sure I get you some money, and we'll get you a little grant for your church hall. Or we'll make sure that we kind of channel some dollars from point A to point B so that you can cover off your insurance problem. And we'll get through the election. And you know what? By golly, a slap in the back, and we'll smile and be happy, and everybody will be just hunky-dory. Vote for us, you'll have no problems. But the systemic problems are there, Mr. Chairman, and they know it, and they know it, and those who may not be the chosen ones on the government benches, they're the losers. They're the losers because they're out to fend for themselves as they go door to door. That's what'll happen. Those poor saps, they're going to be thrown to the wolves. That's what'll happen because they haven't been kind of ingratiated. So, is that how we deal with public policy problems today? I would think not. Mr. Chairman, we have some major problems in this province. I speak to seniors in my constituency, Mr. Chairman, and pardon? Oh, well, whether they receive an intervention from the member for Dartmouth North says many of them will not receive the $155. Well, whether they do or whether they don't, that is not the issue, you know. And this government doesn't get it. This government doesn't get the fact that the John Buchanan administration bankrupted this province. And there'll be governments of all different political stripes come before this House for the next 20 years, and maybe even longer. And they're going to be faced with this anchor that's been put around their neck. And that's what's most offensive, Mr. Chairman, about what the government did to try and provide this $155 rebate. They went and they borrowed $118 million. And they're going to give 65 or 67 million back to the people of Nova Scotia. What are they going to do with the rest? They're going to go out and try and buy some votes. Now, if it's a balanced budget, why are they borrowing money? I can see if they had a surplus of $118 million and they wanted to give that surplus back to the people of Nova Scotia, I would say that's great because we'd be on target and we'd be inside the envelope, so to speak. But see, how can you believe what the government is saying or doing? Because they're saying they're only going to collect an extra $13.5 million on the insurance premiums, when in fact, all indications are they'll nearly double the amount of taxes they'll collect on insurance premiums. Mr. Chairman, we have another problem coming up at the university level in this province for Nova Scotia students. And that is the fact, now that Ontario has eliminated grade 13, now they're just going to go to grade 12, same as other jurisdictions. We are going to have twice as many students from Ontario applying for college, for university entrance in the province of Nova Scotia. And if it's coming down, Mr. Chairman, to bucks, to the dollars, and the Ontario government has deeper pockets than the province of Nova Scotia, and universities are struggling to balance their budgets and to meet revenue targets, who do you think they'll be giving preference to? They will be giving preference to students from Ontario, and that'll put more pressure on Nova Scotia families in terms of their ability to be able to allow their students to continue at post-secondary education. I mean, what's going to happen? There's been no plan on that. Bill 36 doesn't speak to it, not in the budget, because the Department of Education is looking at cutting its expenditures. Whereas now the debt servicing cost to the budget has now moved from third place into second place. Now the Minister of Finance says, well, you know, you have to take into account sinking funds and all these, investments and certificates and bonds and all this sort of stuff. But the bottom line is, Mr. Chairman, when you take away all the double talk, the cost of servicing the debt is now the number 2 charge on the public purse. Health, which was, when this government came to power, was $1.6 billion, is now going to be $2.1 billion. Now, I think that's a little more than $74.6 million. I'll leave that. Now, education, the investment in education has gone down. It's now less than $1 billion. Okay? Servicing the debt has gone up. It's 1.1, it's 1.055 billion. So the total debt, which the Minister of Finance says is 11.6 billion. But till this very moment, and it's been, as you know, Mr. Chairman, it's been almost a month since the Deputy Minister of Finance appeared before Public Accounts. And the Minister of Finance has not been able to give us confirmation as to whether the $1.5 billion of unfunded liability on the insurance programs of this province are included in that 11.5. So if the Minister of Finance is not able to tell us that, who can? He's the Chief Financial Officer for the province, and he can't tell us if that unfunded liability is factored into the $11.5 billion debt. We have no other choice but to conclude that the debt is 13, the 11.6, I said 11.5, but 11.6 plus the 1.5, the total debt has to be in excess of $13.1 billion. It has to be. No, it is. If you include the unfunded liability from the different insurance programs, all the different insurance programs, the teachers' pension plans, the public service pension plan, and so on. Add that all in there, the total debt for this province presently is $13.1 billion. It's not 11.6. Further, Mr. Chairman, the Minister, or the Deputy Minister of Finance gave members of the committee, in essence, gave members of the House an undertaking that he would provide a list of the user fees. You know, the revenues that were being generated by new and existing user fees. We haven't received that yet. Now, why is it that complicated? They put out a rap sheet last fall on this issue for each individual, for the last budget, for each government department. How were they able to come up with those figures if they didn't know what their user fees were? So, I mean, somebody is not being straight up with us. And this is becoming a pattern. This is becoming a pattern coming out of public accounts. When's it going to stop? You wonder why the opposition wouldn't support a budget when the government says, go ferret it out, and then we have witness upon witness upon witness coming in and giving obsolete information and vacuous information. The people of Nova Scotia, I can pretty well assure you, the people in Cape Breton West will know the difference, because we will tell them and we will let them make up their mind who to trust when they go to the ballot box. Mr. Chairman, running around, you know, like Johnny-come-lately saying, whoa, we're giving you a 10% tax break. 10% tax break on what? Explain it. Is it on your total gross income? Or is it 10% of the provincial percentage? What is it? Break it down and give us some clarity. You know, it wouldn't help for government members to take some advice from that ad on TV. Take some Claritin. They need clarity over there, Mr. Chairman. They're in the fog. They're in the dark. Come out of their burrows. Come up for air, for heaven's sake. Stand up and tell the people of Nova Scotia why you support this. You know, what is this 10% that you're talking about? Is it 10% of the total income? No, it's not. Is it 10% of the provincial government's share? Or is it 10% on that decoupling factor. There are so many ambiguities, but see, this is typical John Buchanan style politics. You know, we can give you voodoo economics, and we can try and make you feel good. You know, that government ran around the province for 12 years, slapping everybody on the back, making you feel good, smiling at them, while they bankrupted. Then they pilfered just about every penny they could out of the pockets of the taxpayers of this province to the point of near bankruptcy. And now we're going to see this again. You know, we saw over at the Workers' Compensation Board, one of the best CEOs that board ever had brought us from the verge of bankruptcy, you know, when we had 76% unfunded liability down to 24% or 25% unfunded liability. And what's his thanks? The boys downtown want him gone. Why? Maybe because he wasn't subject to political manipulation. Maybe my suggestion last year during the budgetary process or during the restructuring of government, when they wanted to put the board under the auspices of Policy and Management Board, was to put it under direct political control. See, it doesn't do us any good. We can't manipulate the rates. We can't have say as to who should or shouldn't get a workers' compensation claim, whether it's legitimate or not. If things are operating at an arm's length professional basis, we got to have it political. We got to get back to the good old-fashioned John Buchanan days. We got to be able to control and manipulate things. That's what happened. Why do you think so much work was done to kind of take that out of the hands of government? Why do you think we had the Wesrays of this world? Because of political interference and pressures. Mr. Chairman, have we not learned anything? Has this government not learned anything? And why? Government backbenchers would sit there day in and day out and say nothing is just beyond comprehension. You know, I received a copy of the correspondence from the clerk today, Mr. Chairman, a piece of correspondence you in your previous life, in your other capacity as chairman of the Resources Committee, I believe it was, sent a letter to the Minister of Agriculture, you know, the copies of the minutes of the meeting, Nova Scotia fruit growers. And I thought that was good, but all he did was send back a letter of acknowledgement and, you know, have a nice day. There was no question about resolving the policy difference between himself and the member for Annapolis, who wants to bring an apple marketing board to Nova Scotia. You know, he raised that at the committee meeting twice. You know, he was in favor of it. You know, maybe, Mr. Chairman, we could entice the honourable member for Annapolis to get up and say whether that's going to be party policy, government policy, when he goes around to all the apple growers in his constituency as to whether they favor an apple marketing board. Because the fruit growers in Nova Scotia didn't seem to think that was a good idea. What's the policy? So, maybe there's an ulterior motive, you know? Maybe there's an ulterior motive. We'll leave that for the honourable member for Annapolis to speak on that issue. Mr. Chairman, we saw what the Minister of Natural Resources did with security issues in this province. The investment for this charge, you know, for silviculture and forestry renewal fees, this checkoff, as we know, all the contractors in the province have to pay into. You know, when they go to whether it be Stora or Bowater Mercy or Scott Paper, whatever, they have this checkoff fee, and it's for to help the small private contractors and woodlot owners in this province. And who gets the lion's share? Who gets the lion's share? A multinational, international corporation based out of New Brunswick. Yes, Mr. Chairman, the lion's share went to the Irving Empire. Now, is that what that program was set up for? I'm not diminishing for 1 second the tremendous work that this company does, both in New Brunswick, in Nova Scotia, and other jurisdictions. It employs, I believe, just in the shipyards and other entities around, some 1,600 employees. But I mean, was that what the checkoff was for? To take that from the average landowner, the small private woodlot owner, some 30,000 in the province, take that little bit of a levy, a bit of a leverage, an opportunity to help the small guy, the small woodlot owner in this province, to be able to improve his woodlot. And where does it go? With the minister's help, it goes to the international, the multinationals. I don't see the minister now standing up for these small private woodlot owners. Why not? Why not? He's probably embarrassed because the lion's share went to the multinational corporations. And I think that's pitiful. It's pitiful. You know, and you wonder why people would be upset about foreign ownership in the province. You wonder why people would be upset about increased taxation. You wonder why people would be upset about increased downloading through the Exchange of Services program. Now, through this budget, and with the help of Bill 36, Mr. Chairman, the municipal taxpayers, the property taxpayers of this province, will now have to pay upwards of an extra 5% towards the cost of education at the local school board level. Why? Why, Mr. Chairman? Why is the government doing that to the people of Nova Scotia? And they sit there with such indifference. But that's one of the good things, Mr. Chairman. It's one of the good things about modern technology. You know, as much as we may criticize the media, or as much as we may say, well, look, you know, that's not the message I was getting out there. That's only a voice clip, and that's not really what I meant, and that's only part of the whole story. But at least what's happening now, Mr. Chairman, with Eastlink is province-wide. Anyone that's hooked on with cable and communications today, they're watching today, and they're asking themselves, where's my member? He's on the government side. Where is he? Where is she? And they're saying, my golly, why are these opposition members up saying all these things? And we don't know if they're true. We don't know if they're not true. But the government, where are the government members? Where's my MLA from Shelburne? Where's my MLA from Bedford Basin? Where's my MLA from Kings North? They're not allowed to talk? I don't know. Mr. Chairman, they have equal access to Eastlink and Cape Breton Cablevision and Seaside Cable and you name it, all over this province. They have equal access. They have an excellent opportunity to stand up and say why they think it's okay for the government to collect twice as much in taxes this year on insurance premiums, hidden insurance premiums, by the way, than they were last year. They have an opportunity to defend that. They also have an opportunity to defend why the government is gouging an extra tens of millions of dollars on fees, on gasoline fees. How much time? Mr. Chairman, I've just touched essentially on two issues with seniors and university students. And I believe because they are the two groups that seem to be the one most adversely affected, because students are the ones that are just starting to get some experience, some job experience, and just getting, as we would say years ago, we would say they're just trying to get their feet wet. You know, like even more concerning, Mr. Chairman, if you look this year, you know, or even since this government took power and they started doing away with the occupational health and safety regulations of this province, okay? They putting them in abeyance, you know, when the sunset clause kicked in. And what happened? The number of injuries for students in this province went up 5%. Why? Why, Mr. Chairman? Because government put its big business priorities ahead of the health and safety of the workers in Nova Scotia, and most importantly, students. That's another reason why, Mr. Chairman, we have to stand up. They need some leaders. They need help. If the government wants to do something to help these students, you know, they look at any educational institution, any university in this province, whether it be down in Kings County, you know, Acadia University, whether it be the University, the St. Anne, whether it be Dalhousie, St. Mary's, St. Vincent, Mount St. Vincent, you know, Daltech, St. FX, the Teachers College, or UCCB, or the former Teachers College, the Agricultural College. At least that brought the Minister of Justice awake. You know, he has some experience there, and at least I know he's heard something. Something is getting through to them over there, Mr. Chairman. But if all the students at these institutions are paying anywhere from 45 to 50% of the total cost of education, if they're paying 45 to 50% of all the bills, shouldn't they have a greater say on the board of directors? You know, these collective boards where you have administration, you have the professors have representation, you have government representation, you have student representation, but on average, they only represent 8 to 12% of the voice on the board. And yet they're paying upwards of 40 to 50% of the bills. Now, doesn't that seem a little unfair? I'm not suggesting that students should be running the board of directors on managing the financial affairs of the university. But by golly, if it's good enough for us as policymakers to say, you got to pay this or you're out, you know, you've got to pay this extra 8% or you've got to pay this extra 7%, whether you like it or not, by golly, I think they should have better than a minuscule voice on how to manage the affairs of the universities of this province. And the member for Kings North, he should know that. Why isn't he standing up for the university students in his constituency? What about all the other MLAs on the government benches? Why aren't they? They're burying their heads. They're like ostriches. They got their head buried in the sand. Well, Mr. Chairman, the people of Nova Scotia, they listen, they learn, and they know, Mr. Chairman, that $155, or what we call the rum bottle budget, those days are gone. You can't collect $1,500 out of a person's pocket and then expect to give $155 back and say, vote for me because we're the best.
Order, please. The Honourable, the member for Kings North. The Honourable member has about 30 seconds to place his question.
30 seconds. My question was really when he mentioned education, the importance of community college and the good work that this government has done in putting community college education at the forefront. What he thought of that was my question.
Well, the Honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Time is very limited on this. I will come back to this topic, but I noticed how he deliberately skirted the issue of Acadia University.
Order, please. Unfortunately, the Honourable member's time has expired at this time, and we must move to the NDP caucus. And we'll recognize the Honourable member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise in my place to speak to Bill 36, the Financial Measures Act. I've really spent a fair amount of time thinking about this act because it's an important piece of legislation. As we all know, Mr. Speaker, it is the companion piece of legislation to the government's budget, and this act is essentially gives the budget its implementation. And Mr. Speaker, there isn't anybody here in this caucus that wouldn't agree that Nova Scotian families deserve a break. if you reflect back on the past decade in Nova Scotia, then this is a decade where we have seen cuts, deep cuts made by governments, starting with the Cameron government and followed by the Liberal government of Dr. Savage and the McClellan government. We have seen public services during this decade eroded tremendously. We have seen the billing numbers that were available to medical doctors frozen, and the impact of that was a real decline in the number of healthcare practitioners, specifically GPs and physicians, particularly in remote and rural and underserviced areas. We saw less spaces in medical schools. We saw the closing of nursing hospital training programs and replaced by a 4-year program that takes longer to train nurses. We've seen nurses paid to leave the profession. We've seen cuts to the education system, both in terms of the operating costs for school boards and their abilities to maintain the existing schools, or even to replace schools that are required in growing communities. We've seen university funding frozen. We've seen this government abolish the loan remission program for students who are required to carry a greater and greater financial burden for post-secondary education. So we've seen a huge assault by previous Liberal and Tory governments on public services, health, education, and social services in Nova Scotia. Our roads are in decline and are a disgrace in many parts of the province. So on the one hand, we have experienced a decade, Mr. Speaker, of a real lack of investment in our important public services, in our infrastructure that we have come to expect of governments. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, families all across this province, and indeed throughout our country, have experienced a real decline in their incomes. Incomes have stagnated considerably throughout the past 10 years. And to add insult to injury, we've seen governments contribute to this erosion of family income by wage freezes and wage rollbacks, and really shifting of the taxation burden away from progressive income tax to a regressive form of consumption taxes with the introduction of the HST, and in Nova Scotia we have seen the blending of the federal and provincial taxes, which have placed an enormous burden on families in this province. So, Mr. Speaker, there is no question that given that reality, that background to what has occurred over a 10-year period, Nova Scotians, whether they live in families or whether they're single people, seniors on their own, they deserve a break. And so, Mr. Speaker, it's in that context, I believe, that we need to look at the Financial Measures Act that has been brought forward by this government, and we need to ask ourselves, does this government, in their budget and in the Financial Measures Act, do they deliver in terms of providing a break to Nova Scotians, given the kind of pain and the kind of situation that people have faced over the past 10 years in this province? And Mr. Speaker, it's when you apply that test to the Financial Measures Act and this government's budget, that you in fact see how profoundly unfair this particular budget is and the measures in this budget are. And you also see, Mr. Speaker, how this government fails the test of giving families who deserve a break the break they require. Mr. Speaker, I want to speak first about the $155 income tax rebate that will go to Nova Scotians who paid income tax in the past few years. And the member from Cape Breton South said that, you know, people he knows and he speaks to are going to take that rebate gladly because they feel they are owed that and more. And I would say that that reflects pretty well the view of many people in my constituency. I represent Halifax-Needham, a working class part of the Halifax Peninsula, where many families in my community have experienced the erosion of public services, the eroding of their income, the stagnation of their income, and the impact on greater consumption taxes like HST on their income. And over the winter, they have seen exorbitant increases in fuel, the cost of fuel, the taxation on fuel for home heating, the cost of gasoline at the pumps, the taxation that has been added onto that at the pumps. And I think, Mr. Speaker, for many of these people, the $155 rebate is something that they will look at and say, sure, I'm going to take it, but don't think for one moment that this is going to buy me off in terms of having a very critical perspective and understanding on what this government is all about. Mr. Speaker, people in my constituency recognize that at the same time that the government is giving back the so-called $155 tax rebate, that if they require ambulatory care, they may in fact end up having to pay a $500 bill. They see the user fees that this government has heaped on at every turn, and this has taken a real bite out of people's incomes. They have looked at the HST when they get their fuel bills, and they have seen the kind of windfall that this government has realized by increasing fuel and gasoline costs. So people are not, they are not bamboozled into the kind of game that this government is playing with respect to the $155 rebate. And in many cases, they recognize that in our community, in my community, there are a significant number of people who will not see one plugged nickel off that rebate because they are people with disabilities on Canada Pension Disability, or they are people who are senior citizens receiving the Guaranteed Income Supplement. They are single mothers who are in receipt of employment and income support programs. They are people who actually could use $155, maybe more than anybody else, but they're not going to see any of that money because they did not pay income tax in the last year. So generally speaking, Mr. Speaker, people understand that this rebate is, they see it for what it is, and they recognize that it is not fair, and they recognize that it does nothing to address the kind of pain and suffering and the financial insecurity that governments have created in our community with their public policy decisions over the past 10 years as they also erode services, important services that people need in the community. Taxation is an issue that is an important issue to people, and there are ways of making our tax system more fair and giving the kinds of relief and the kinds of break that families deserve. And this government had alternatives. They had other choices that they could have made when they looked at what was available to them. They chose a system which will reward the highest earners in this province, people with six-figure salaries, who, as I used an example in here before, the presidents of the universities, for example, will get that $155 check, even though most of those presidents live in housing that's provided for them through their employment, are able to send their children to university tuition-free, and yet they are the ones who will benefit. They will see this $155 rebate, Mr. Speaker, while many of the students who are in those institutions, who were unable to get summer employment, who did not pay any income tax last year, will not see the $155 rebate. Now, Mr. Speaker, this hardly seems fair. In fact, it seems very unfair. Another aspect of this this particular Financial Measures Act that always that has been a very great concern to us is the exemption that that the government gave in the Financial Measures Act to Casino Nova Scotia, to exempt them from any municipal bylaws. And as we know, Mr. Speaker, this exemption is in this act in response to the bylaws that have been adopted by the Halifax Regional Municipality and indeed the Cape Breton Regional Municipality to require that the casinos in their respective jurisdictions be smoke-free places. Mr. Speaker, this government last spring brought forward a piece of legislation, a Smoke-Free Places Act, and at that time it provided in that legislation an exemption for the casino so that people could go ahead and smoke at the casino. Anybody over the age of 19, I believe, could smoke at the casino. However, at that time, many of the people who came before the Law Amendments Committee from the service sector, hospitality sector, came and indicated that they wanted a level playing field. And the other thing was that many of the health-conscious groups, Smoke Free Nova Scotia and Canadian Cancer Society, many of these groups also wanted a more level playing field, not just a level playing field, they wanted healthy workplaces for workers in the hospitality industry. But the government and the Minister of Health at that time were not prepared to do the right thing, and they left a provision in their legislation that would allow municipalities the power to go further than the provincial legislation. And several municipalities around the province have taken advantage of the provincial legislation, and HRM being one of them, and Cape Breton Regional Municipality being the other. And lo and behold, what happens? The government steps in and says, no, that was a big mistake. We should not have allowed you to have the autonomy, the jurisdiction to do this, and we're now going to take it back because we don't want the casino touched. And initially, the government had raised the specter, the possibility that this would result in the casino taking the province to the cleaners for hundreds of millions of dollars as a breach of contract if they were to suddenly find themselves having to adhere to municipal bylaws. And Mr. Speaker, we've had an opportunity to look at the contract with the casino, and we're very doubtful that in fact this interpretation can be given to the contract, that it would be that easy for the casino operators to stand up and say, well, this is definitely a financial hardship for us, and we're not prepared to tolerate this, and we want to be compensated in the millions of dollars. And more to the point, Mr. Speaker, this province hasn't even initiated any kind of negotiation or discussion with the casino under the dispute resolution. We don't even know if there is a dispute, but if there were, you would go through this process, Mr. Speaker. And it seems to be quite premature that the government rush in with such an amendment in the Financial Measures Act to exempt Casino Nova Scotia from what quite properly is a municipal bylaw that the municipalities were empowered to pass, and in fact would contribute to both a level playing field for other players in the hospitality and service sector, as well as the very important public policy goal of protecting the health and the well-being for people in that particular workplace. Mr. Speaker, we have seen Heather Crow, the waitress from Ottawa, originally from Nova Scotia, who's featured very prominently in the national television campaign with respect to the impact of secondhand smoke on people's health, come here to this legislature, and prior to coming here to the House, she had an opportunity to meet with members of all three party caucuses, and she put forward to us, Mr. Speaker, her plea that she be the last worker to die in this country from secondhand smoke. And it's very hard to imagine that the government, especially a government which is headed by a family doctor, would turn his back on the evidence of such a person as Heather Crow, a woman who has never smoked in her lifetime, who worked in the hospitality industry, who, because she was exposed to secondhand smoke throughout her employment, now suffers from terminal lung cancer. And her landmark case in the province of Ontario, where she has successfully fought the workers' compensation program and actually has been found to be entitled to compensation as a result of a workplace injury from secondhand smoke, is really quite a tribute, a sad tribute, but a tribute to her resolve. And Mr. Speaker, I think that let us hope that there won't be other Heather Crows, and that this province won't contribute to the situation of having other Heather Crows. Mr. Speaker, when I look at the Financial Measures Act, I ask myself, what are other elements of this act that could have been constructed in a way that would make better use of the precious resources, financial resources that we have in this province. And Mr. Speaker, I can't help but turn my attention to the current strike that is going on between the RRSS group home workers and and really the government. And although the government would like to take they would like the public to believe that they have nothing to do with this situation, people in the public really aren't fooled by that. They recognize that the government is the funder of our RSS. Our RSS doesn't have a money tree in their backyard. They have no other pot of money. The money that they use to operate their small options homes is money that comes from government. And today, Mr. Speaker, we received here in the House some correspondence. I would imagine you did, Mr. Speaker. We all, I think, received copies of some of the submissions that have been made to the Law Amendments Committee. And I was struck by the content of certainly one of these submissions, which I would be happy to table, although I'm not really going to read from it, Mr. Speaker. But we had a submission from Elaine LaForge and Andrea Flores, who are both members of Local 66, the Nova Scotia Government Employees Union. And in their submission, they talk about the work that they've done, and they talk about the concerns they have for the residents. And one of the things that caught my attention, Mr. Speaker, was the parts of their submission when they talked about how they have been asked for years in these services to provide adequate nutrition and meals to the residents that they work with an inadequate budget. And this part of their presentation, Mr. Speaker, is truly infuriating if you read through it. To imagine that staff in these group homes are having to bring food from home into work because there is not enough money in the budget to adequately provide for the residents, that the group home residents have inadequate financial support for clothing allowances, and that they have to purchase all of their clothing at secondhand clothing stores and what have you. It sounds to me, as I read this, that this labor dispute reflects how undervalued.
Order, please. The member for Halifax Needham has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. This presentation does show that the residents who live in these small options homes are not adequately valued by this government. You know, a lot of people would like to talk about the workers, and I believe that the workers and their work are very important. But I can't help but think that the reason there is no movement from this government on resolving the current dispute really has nothing to do with the workers as much as it has to do with the value that this government places on the residents of these small options homes. Mr. Speaker, it is the residents in these small option homes, adults with intellectual and other disabilities, who will not see 5 cents of the $155 tax rebate from this government. However, every one of those residents would, while they may not pay income tax, they would certainly pay tax, Mr. Speaker, every time they go to the grocery store and they buy, you know, a pack of gum. They're paying, if they get their hair cut, they're paying tax. They are taxpayers, but not valued as taxpayers by this government, and they're not valued as people by this government when they're moved out of their residences and placed in places like the nurses' residence at the Nova Scotia Hospital, or when they are cared for by people who are unfamiliar to them in a situation that has gone on now for much too long, Mr. Speaker. So I think that members of the government would be well advised to read some of these submissions that have been made by the group home workers, particularly when they're talking about the kinds of difficulties that they, as caregivers, have encountered in simply trying to provide adequate meals in these settings and adequate personal kinds of care. And you know, Mr. Speaker, this is a trademark of this government. Not caring for the people who are the most vulnerable in our society has been an absolute trademark for the people, for this government. We've seen they had an opportunity to address the long-term care issue for seniors and others who go into nursing homes. They could have done that in this budget with this Financial Measures Act, and they chose to put that off until 2007. Well, not good enough, Mr. Speaker. This is a situation that has gone on for far too long. By 2007, there will be at least another 6,000 seniors who will see their hard work, their life savings depleted as they are at their most vulnerable and in need of care in a nursing home facility. And Mr. Speaker, this is not acceptable in this day and age. If this government can find $68 million to just give away in $155 portions prior to an election, then certainly they could have a bit more creativity when it comes to finding resources to deal with our most vulnerable people who have made an enormous contribution to our province over their lifetime when they most need it. So this is a government that had an opportunity to do something to address some of these situations, but did nothing. And they will have to defend that. They will have to stand up to public scrutiny when the time comes, and it will be here probably sooner rather than later, Mr. Speaker. And the Minister of Justice is indicating that he will have no difficulty doing that, and we will see about that. So, Mr. Speaker, it's always a mystery to me why anybody would perceive the Tories as good managers. If you look at the Buchanan government that brought this province to the financial brink, and the Cameron government that started us down the path of deep cuts in public services. And now we have the John Hamm government that has continued along this path of chipping away at some of our most important public services and heaping more costs onto individuals, increasing the cost of pharmacare, for example, taking away loan remission, and the kind of half measures that we've seen in terms of trying to rectify some of those things they have done. Putting in place a kind of loan remission program that only is half of what it was that they took away for students, at the same time that they sit idly by and they watch the tuition increases in the university sector just go through the roof. You might as well have universities privatized at the rate that tuition is climbing in this province. In fact, Mr. Speaker, this is what we have. We have privatization of university education in Nova Scotia by stealth. There's no announcement that it's happening. We're going to privatize the universities, but essentially that's what is occurring. And for many young people, university education has become out of reach. You know, Mr. Speaker, I went to university in 1971, I think, or around then. My first year at university was at St. FX.